City leaders are looking at ways to turn up the heat on landlords who leave their tenants out in the cold. The city passed stricter fire safety laws in the wake of the tragic Twin Parks fire, which claimed the lives of 17 people. But public advocate Jumaane Williams says landlords need to be held more accountable.
Until we take buildings from owners, until we hold people criminally liable, until we take away the ability to make profit off that, I'm not sure that these stores will end.
A report released on the one-year anniversary of the Twin Parks fire reveals that communities of color are plagued with heat issues. New York City Comptroller Brad Lander joining us this morning to go over more of these findings in this very report. So good morning to you, Comptroller. Thank you for being here. Happy New Year.
Good morning, Dan and Hazel. Great to be with you.
And so before we actually discuss the report, I do want to get you on the breaking news that we're following very closely, this nurses' strike, right? We just spoke to one of the nurses on the picket lines impacting two of the city's largest hospitals, Comptroller. You were out there yesterday, the nurses holding out for some more staffing. What should the city be doing to step in? Should they at all be stepping in to bring an end to the strike?
Look, it's always good to bring people together. In this case, the nurses have shown through the deals they reached at New York Presbyterian and Maimonides and the other systems, they want to be in there taking care of patients, but the hospitals have to give them safe staffing ratios. I was out on the line yesterday, and what every single nurse said to me is, I just want to be able to take good care of my patients, and that means more nurses alongside me.
So do you think the city should step in?
Well, look, I think I'm a big believer in collective bargaining. These nurses are fighting for good treatment for themselves and their patients. Does it help if City Hall says, come sit down in our office and we'll provide the coffee and donuts for your negotiations? Sure, but you have to respect workers in their rights to organize and in their pushing for what they need to do a good job.
All right. Well, let's turn to the report now. So one of the significant findings in it found that most of the buildings with heat complaints were actually in central Brooklyn, northern Manhattan, and in the South Bronx and the Northwest Bronx. So what did that tell you?
Yeah, so it's over 70,000 buildings that at some point over the last 5 years, tenants brought heat complaints in. As you say, 90% people of color. So these are landlords who are just not respecting the basic humanity of their tenants. And in many cases, apparently, because of the color of their skin, everybody needs a safe and warm apartment.
Comptroller, there's more than 1,000 buildings, right, that have been classified as this having a chronic lack of heat. Why hasn't the city, I guess, taken any action to address these issues and do some of these emergency repairs, especially when it comes to NYCHA buildings? You anticipate this every single winter. Monica Morales is out there every single winter talking about the same issues. It's like Groundhog Day.
Well, this is what I found most disturbing of all. This report we released yesterday only looks at privately owned buildings. NYCHA, as Monica, as we've looked at before, is right. Also a tragic issue in NYCHA buildings, which of course the city is the landlord for itself. But in these 1,077 privately owned buildings, tenants have complained many times every year for the last 5 years. That's what we mean by consistently or chronically cold. Every single year, more than 10 complaints over a 5-year period. And we know what works. You write violations. You litigate against the landlords. You install heat sensors. The city can check itself. And yes, as you say, you do emergency repairs. And when the city does those things, it works and the problems get solved. But in over 25% of those 1,000 buildings, over the 5 years of all those heat complaints, the city did not do one single enforcement strategy. No violations, no litigation, no heat sensors, no emergency repairs. And that's why we issued this report. The city has to turn up the heat on these landlords who are leaving their tenants in the freezing cold.
I mean, finding them is basically not doing anything at all, right? They just don't pay it.
That's
so
right.
So what else can be done to make sure?
Let's be clear, though. In these 274 buildings, we didn't even find them. No violations were issued. So that's 274 buildings cold every year for 5 years where we didn't even write a violation to fine a landlord. So yes, write the fines. We need more escalating fines, as the public advocate just said, in those buildings where even after fines, landlords still don't comply. Then we'll need escalating strategies like litigation. And in some cases, yes, it may be appropriate for the city to step in and say this building is going to be purchased and transferred to an owner who's going to provide heat to the tenants.
Yeah, I mean, the public advocate, for example, says the problems will persist until landlords are held accountable. This is not new, right? He has the worst landlord list that he comes out with every single year. So, like you're talking about, aside from issuing these violations, litigation and so on and so forth, is it possible, though, to say you're no longer a landlord?
Well, I will say our strategies do work a surprising amount of the time. One thing our report found is in those cases when the city does write violations, does bring litigation, does do emergency repairs, or does install heat sensors, the problems are generally actually significantly better
Okay, so let
the
me ask you this
following
then.
year
Let me ask
than
you
they
this.
were before.
Okay, good. So, but why then were there no violations written? Why?
That's right. Look, this is the question we're asking the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I think some of it has to do with staffing. We've talked about vacancies in a lot of the city agencies, and some of it has to do with enforcement not being very strategic. They get calls from those 70,000 buildings, and we haven't had a more data-driven or strategic enforcement program that sends inspectors to those buildings where the heat has been off the most amount of time. They do have a new system for tracking inspections, and we're hoping that that will mean that they can be much more strategic. But I do agree with the public advocate in those cases where we do enforce and landlords still don't do anything, we will have to turn up the heat and consider transferring the building to owners just who will provide basic services. The vast majority of landlords do.
Well, we are quickly running out of time, but we do want to ask you about the city finances. I mean, we've been crippled by the COVID crisis. We're dealing with the migrant crisis. There's an affordable housing crisis. I mean, there's just so much that we're dealing with right now. So fiscally, is New York City in trouble? And if so, what's the plan to get us out of this hole?
Look, we have a lot of challenges that we're facing that COVID dealt us and then some other surprises as well. I will say the economy has shown some signs of real strength. We're back to 97.2% of the jobs we had pre-pandemic. Even with some losses, tech and healthcare jobs are above pre-pandemic norms. So I'm looking to hear what the governor says in her State of the State today. We need help from the state to provide shelter and services for the asylum seekers. That is something I'm proud New York City is doing, but the federal government and the state government have to step up and provide the city the resources to help these folks who have walked across a continent, who want to work, who deserve the opportunity that immigrants have had for generations, and will help revive our economy if we help them get on our feet.
Okay, Comptroller Brad Lander, appreciate you being here and laying everything out for us. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.